You've probably done this 100 times. You're on your way to the kitchen for a snack, you step through the doorway, and suddenly your brain hands you a blank stare. Why did you come in here? That ordinary, slightly embarrassing moment is what psychologists call the doorway effect, and it's actually a clue to how your brain organizes experience. Researchers like Gabriel Radvansky found that walking through a doorway creates an event boundary in your mind. Think of your day as a movie made of lots of short scenes. Doorways are natural scene markers. When you cross one, your brain says, "Okay, new scene coming up," and it starts to shift its focus. The short-term stuff you were holding in working memory about the old scene gets set aside, almost like clearing a whiteboard to make room for new information. This isn't the same as losing a file forever. It's more like putting it in a different drawer so you can concentrate on what's ahead. Why would the brain do that? It turns out this system is efficient. If you never cleared out old context, your mind would be cluttered with irrelevant details, like trying to watch a new movie without being able to stop thinking about the last one. Flushing some short-term info helps the hippocampus and other memory systems prioritize what matters in the new environment. In evolutionary terms, it's helpful. Entering a new space often means new dangers to notice or new opportunities to act on, so your brain gears up for that. Experiments are neat because they mirror your everyday oops moments. In lab studies, people walking through actual doorways or even virtual doors were more likely to forget objects or tasks than people who stayed in the same space. The forgetting didn't happen because people weren't paying attention. It was triggered by the boundary itself. This also explains why non-physical doorways can cause the same problem. Switching browser tabs, starting a new conversation, or even shifting from work to home mode can produce that same partitioning. Your mind likes tidy episodes. So what can you do when the doorway gobbles up a thought? A few simple tricks help. Pause for a second before you step through and say aloud, "I'm going to the kitchen for my keys." Keep the item in your hand when possible, or leave a visual cue. Put your phone where you'll notice it. If you already forgot, retrace your steps. Going back often reconstructs the previous scene and pulls the memory back into view. The next time you blank at the threshold, don't blame yourself. Your brain is just doing its job, trying to keep your mental workspace ready for whatever comes next. Time dilation. Think about the last time you jumped in front of a bus-sized panic. Your heart racing, everything hyper-clear, and that moment stretching into a slow-motion movie. Now think of a night out with friends that vanished before you knew it, or standing in a line with nowhere to be, watching the minutes drip. These are the brain's time tricks. Not magic, but survival wiring. When something scary happens, the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, screams, "Pay attention!" It calls in the locus coeruleus, which floods the brain with noradrenaline. Suddenly your senses punch up, sounds sharpen, colors feel brighter, details lodge into memory. There's more data to record, so when you later recall the event, it seems long because your memory contains so many snapshots. In the moment, it can feel slowed too because your brain is sampling reality more frequently. I remember slipping on wet pavement years ago. The 5 seconds it took felt like an eternity, every pebble and crack in freeze frame. That's your survival system giving you extra time to act. Excitement works differently but with the same toolbox. When we're absorbed, laughing with friends, playing music, falling for someone, attention narrows onto the experience and away from the clock. Fewer mental checks of "what time is it" means fewer timestamps stored. Afterward, the memory feels compressed. Where did the evening go? Emotion hijacks attention so you're fully in the moment, which is great for joy, but it makes subjective time speed up. Boredom flips the script. Low arousal means the brain has nothing urgent to do, so attention drifts inward and lands on time itself. You start monitoring seconds, which amplifies every tick. Standing in a sterile waiting room, I've watched a single minute stretch like taffy. That's your mind filling in emptiness by magnifying the passage of time. Chronic boredom or low mood can even blunt memory encoding, creating a numb, blurry stretch that later feels both endless and empty. There's another move the brain uses: dissociation. In overwhelming situations, it may detach parts of experience to protect you, making events feel unreal and time unstable. That numbness is adaptive at extremes. It keeps you going when feeling everything would be unbearable. So time isn't fixed inside us. Emotion tweaks attention, arousal, and memory encoding, bending our sense of duration to help us survive, savor, or survive again. Next time a second feels like an hour or an hour like a blink, remember, your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do, prioritizing what matters, often at the expense of the clock. The Baader Meinhof Phenomenon. Have you ever learned a new word and suddenly it's in every conversation? Or bought a blue bike and noticed blue bikes on every street the rest of the week? That experience has a name: the Baader Meinhof Phenomenon, more commonly called the frequency illusion. It's that weird little trick your brain plays where once something registers, it seems to pop up everywhere, even though the world hasn't actually changed. Here's how it feels in real life. A few months ago, I read an article about micro-habits and decided to try a simple 2-minute morning stretch. The next morning, I walked into a coffee shop and overheard a podcast clip on someone else doing micro-habits. Then a friend texted a link about habit stacking. Suddenly, it looked like everyone was talking about the exact same idea. Did the internet conspire overnight? No. I had just tuned my internal radar to notice that topic. My brain flagged that pattern and handed me every instance it could find. Two mental mechanisms work together here. First, selective attention. When something matters to you, your brain filters for it. It's efficient. We can't pay attention to everything, so we focus on what's relevant. Second, confirmation bias. Once your brain starts noticing those instances, it gives them more weight and ignores the non-instances. So you end up with the impression of a sudden surge, when really you've just shifted what you notice. That doesn't make the phenomenon useless. In fact, it's powerful. Awareness changes your reality. Not because the facts changed, but because your perception did. If you're learning a new skill, the frequency illusion can be your friend. Want to be better at networking? Start paying attention to chances to connect. Suddenly, opportunities will feel abundant. Want to improve your health? Notice every healthy choice and the cues that made them possible. Your brain will start pointing out more of those moments. But there's a flip side. The frequency illusion can make worries look omnipresent too. If you're stressed about your job, negative feedback might seem like it's happening all the time. That's why it helps to step back and ask, has the world changed, or has my attention? A quick reality check, jot down actual instances over a week, can reveal whether you're seeing a pattern or just noticing it more. Next time something feels like it's suddenly everywhere, try this. Pause and name it out loud. I just learned X, and now I'm noticing X everywhere. Naming shifts you from being pulled along by your brain's bias to observing it. It keeps the phenomenon working for you, amplifying growth and learning instead of amplifying anxiety. The world doesn't always change. Sometimes your map of it does. False memories. Which brings us to one of the most surprising truths about our minds. Memories are not like video files stored in a hard drive. They're more like stories we tell ourselves, and every time we tell the story changes. Think about a memory you carry of your childhood, maybe a birthday party, a scraped knee, or a summer afternoon. At first recall, you might picture bright colors, a specific song, maybe even a scent. But if you recall that same moment a week later, some details shift. The cake's frosting might look different, the number of people changes, or the sequence of events slides around. That's not because your brain failed, It's because remembering is an active, reconstructive process. Neuroscience shows that each time you retrieve a memory, you don't simply pull out a static file. Retrieval opens the memory up, lets it be reassembled, and then stores it again, often with subtle edits. This is reconsolidation. The memory becomes malleable when recalled, and whatever you experienced, felt, or were told afterward can sneak into that reconstruction. If someone asks, "Did the car stop at the light?" your answer can be influenced by how the question is framed. If you imagine the car stopping, you may strengthen a memory that didn't happen. I see this in my own life. I used to swear I got lost in a mall as a kid and wandered alone for an hour before my mum found me. The story was vivid: fear, the fluorescent lights, the relief. Years later, while talking with family, my sister laughed and said, "You were never alone. Mum held your hand the whole time. She just left the store for a second." Suddenly, my clear memory felt foggy. How did I remember being alone so strongly? Turns out I had listened to the story so many times, dressed up at birthday dinners and retold for laughs, that the imagined details fused with what actually happened. My confidence didn't make it true. This is the heart of false memories. Confidence and vividness are poor guarantees of accuracy. Psychologists like Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated this with simple experiments. Changing a single word in a question about a car crash made people remember broken glass that never existed. Other studies show that merely imagining an event repeatedly can make people believe it actually happened. Our brains use schemas, mental shortcuts based on prior knowledge, to fill in blanks, and emotion can color those fillings so that a made-up piece feels as real as a true one. The consequences matter. In courtrooms, eyewitness testimony can be compelling to juries, but it's also notoriously unreliable. Wrongful convictions have hinged on confident but mistaken identifications. That's why the science of memory urges humility. Treat recollections as reports, not recordings. Ask non-leading questions, look for corroboration, and remember that the very act of asking can reshape what's being remembered. So the next time you feel certain about a memory, pause. Ask yourself how often you've told that story, whether anything afterward might have changed it, and whether emotion or expectation could be coloring the details. Confidence feels convincing, but it doesn't equal truth. Déjà vu. Think about that weird electric shiver the moment before you tell yourself, "I've been here before." Maybe you're standing in line at a grocery store, or sitting on a park bench watching kids chase a frisbee, and suddenly everything feels like it's a replay. Only you know it isn't. That's déjà vu, and it's less supernatural than it feels. It's your brain's recognition system firing a beat too early and tricking familiarity into passing for prediction. Picture how your brain checks incoming experience. One pathway is quick and blunt. Do I know this? And another is slower and richer, calling up context, details, and where you learned them. Déjà vu happens when the quick recognition light goes on before the deeper context catches up. The result is a confident feeling of having been here before without any memory to back it up. Your mind reads that first signal and says, "That must be familiar," and your intuition fills in the rest with the eerie certainty we call déjà vu. I had one the first week I moved to a new city. I walked into an unfamiliar coffee shop, glanced up, and felt this rush of uncanny familiarity so strong I paused mid-step. There was no memory, no story to explain it, just the sensation that the exact moment had already happened. It snapped me out of autopilot and into this strange, disorienting awareness. Later, reading about how the brain's timing can slip, it made sense. Brief misfires or small delays between the brain's recognition and memory systems can produce that glitch. Stress, fatigue, and sensory overload make these timing hiccups more likely. When you're tired, neural signals slow or become less coordinated. When you're anxious or running on autopilot, your brain leans more heavily on fast recognition shortcuts. Travel and new environments can also trigger déjà vu because your brain is constantly comparing current scenes to large catalogues of past experiences. Sometimes it finds a partial match and mistakes that for a full memory. Most déjà vu experiences are harmless and more common in younger adults. They can be baffling but are usually fleeting and benign. A small subset of persistent or very intense déjà vu can be linked to neurological conditions like temporal lobe epilepsy, but that's rare and typically comes with other symptoms. So next time déjà vu creeps up, don't panic. Notice it, the setting, what you were thinking, how your body reacted. Treat it like a curiosity, not a ghost. That brief temporal hiccup is your brain's recognition system taking a shortcut and giving you a false sense of prediction. A reminder that how we perceive time is deeply tied to how our minds stitch past and present together. The McCullough effect. Next, something that feels almost like a magic trick you pull on your own brain. The McCullough effect. I remember the first time I heard about it. I thought after image and imagined the little ghost of a bright sun burned into my vision for a few seconds. The McCullough effect is not that. It's an optical afterimage that can last for days, even longer, and it proves just how easily our perception can be edited. Here's the basic idea. If you stare for several minutes at a set of colored striped patterns, say green vertical bars and red horizontal bars, your visual system starts to associate color with orientation. Later, when you look at plain black and white stripes, you don't just see neutral lines. Vertical stripes will look faintly pinkish, horizontal stripes a little greenish. The effect is orientation contingent. The color you see depends on the angle of the lines. It's not a retina-only trick like the flash afterimage from a camera. It's believed to arise from changes in how cells in the visual cortex respond to specific orientations and colors. In other words, your brain temporarily rewrites a little rule about how color maps onto shape. I tried it on a lazy Sunday evening. I sat with my laptop open to a grid of alternating colored bars, focused for maybe 10 minutes, and then switched to a simple black and white pattern on my screen. At first I thought it was my imagination, just a suggestion of color, but then that faint pink tint on vertical lines kept showing up for hours. The next morning, I noticed it again when scrolling through a news site. The effect faded slowly over the week. A friend of mine once did a longer session and was surprised when the afterimage stuck around for almost a month. It was harmless, a little weird, and a powerful reminder. Repeated exposure can implant expectations in our visual cortex that shape what we see. Scientists named this after Celeste McCullough, who first described the phenomenon in the 1960s. What's striking is how long it can last compared with other afterimages. Typical photochemical afterimages fade in seconds or minutes, but the McCullough effect persists because it's not just bleaching photopigments. It's a kind of short-term learning in the cortex. Neurons that encode orientation and color start to shift their responses based on the pairing the brain has just experienced. The result is a temporary filter, color where there was none, burned into your perception. It's also a useful thought experiment. If a few minutes of looking at stripes can rewrite how you perceive color and orientation, think about how much more subtle and persistent biases must be implanted by the images we consume constantly. The color palettes of news outlets, the filters on social feeds, the recurring angles and lighting in movies. Our brains are wired to learn regularities, and that learning shows up literally in the way we see. If you want to try it, keep a couple of cautions in mind. Don't stare too long, avoid doing it if you're prone to migraines or photosensitive epilepsy, and don't induce it right before activities that need perfect visual clarity, driving for example. If you do try, pay attention not just to the colors you see, but to how surprised you are that your own perception can be nudged so easily. That surprise is the point. Perception isn't a fixed window on the world, it's a system you can edit, sometimes in a matter of minutes. Capgras delusion. Take the case of Anna. After a mild stroke, she could describe her husband's face in exact detail. The freckle on his cheek, the way his hair fell, the exact cadence of his laugh, and still tell him he wasn't really her husband. "You're not John," she said one afternoon, voice flat. "You look like him, but you're not him." To anyone watching, the two of them looked like a confused couple having an argument. To Anna, the man at her kitchen table was a perfect counterfeit. That's the eerie core of Capgras delusion. The eyes and brain agree you're seeing someone familiar, but the part of you that automatically attaches feeling and familiarity doesn't. Imagine recognizing the face of someone you love with the same visual clarity you'd use to pick them out of a crowd, and yet your chest doesn't stir, your memory doesn't warm, your gut doesn't register the person as safe or home. Without that emotional stamp, the brain scrambles for an explanation. The conclusion it arrives at sounds logical enough in that fractured world. Whoever looks like my wife must be an imposter, a stranger in disguise. This is not a whimsical hallucination. It's a very specific disconnection inside the social brain. Normally, seeing a normal face travels two unofficial pathways, one that reads features and identity, and another that hands that identity to your emotional system so you get that familiar glow or quick warmth when you see someone who matters. In Capgras, the visual recognition pathway, the part that says that's John, is intact, but the transfer to the emotional center, the limbic system, the automatic "this person matters to me" signal, is damaged or blocked. The result is a perception that's correct on paper and stripped of feeling. The mind, acute at finding causes, fills the gap with a delusion. The person must be an imposter. Relatable moments help explain how painful this is. Think about meeting someone you once loved and feeling nothing. No chemistry, no old jokes landing. Or seeing a childhood home that looks the same but feels foreign. Those small recognitions without feeling are disorienting. Capgras turns that familiar disorientation into a crisis of trust. Imagine being the spouse who's suddenly accused of being an intruder because the one you love no longer feels like themselves. Intimacy becomes suspicion. Doors are shut. Photographs are questioned. A lifetime of shared routines is suddenly suspect. The consequences ripple outward. Families are hurt and ashamed. Caregivers feel betrayed. People with Capgras often aren't trying to be cruel. They're reacting to a genuine, if mistaken, perception. For the person experiencing it, the world becomes less safe. The social glue that holds relationships together unravels into doubt and fear. Understanding Capgras reminds us how much of our social life depends on unseen wiring, a quick, automatic emotional handshake between seeing and feeling. When that handshake fails, trust can turn to suspicion in an instant. In the next section, we'll look at another example of how broken connections inside the brain reshape reality in ways that are just as surprising and sometimes even harder to explain. The scene completion illusion. Think about the last time you walked into a familiar room and felt instantly certain of where everything was, even though you didn't consciously scan each object. That sense of a complete, stable world is mostly a construction. Your eyes capture fragments, a high-resolution sliver where you're directly looking and blurrier shapes in the periphery. Your brain stitches those pieces together and fills in the rest with educated guesses. That's the scene completion illusion. Start with how the eyes actually work. The sharpest vision lives in the fovea, a tiny spot at the center of your gaze. To see something clearly, your eyes dart, those tiny rapid moves called saccades. So the fovea samples different parts of the scene. Between saccades, you get a snapshot, but it's not a continuous high-res video. Add the blind spot where the optic nerve leaves the eye, a literal hole with no photoreceptors, and you can see how the raw input is riddled with gaps, yet you never notice a floating missing patch. Why? Because your brain fills it. The filling in isn't magic, it's prediction. Based on surrounding colors, textures, and your past experience with similar scenes, the visual cortex interpolates what should be there. If you've ever looked at a face in dim light and saw the details that weren't actually there, that's your brain painting in plausible features. It's efficient. Instead of reconstructing every tiny detail, it generates the most likely version of reality and updates it when something contradicts the prediction. You can test this on yourself. Close one eye and focus the other on a point while holding a small card with a dot to the side. Move the card into just the right spot and an object that should be visible disappears. It lies in your blind spot. Yet you rarely notice anything wrong because your brain replaces it with the surrounding visual pattern. Then think about change blindness. Watch two almost identical photos flicker with a brief grey frame between them, and you'll often fail to spot a large change unless your attention is drawn exactly to the altered area. Your perception isn't a faithful recording, it's selective and hypothesis-driven. This process explains everyday quirks. You're convinced you saw your friend wave, but when you replay the scene mentally, you realize there was only a suggestion of movement. Your expectation filled the rest. You walk into a kitchen and are sure a mug sat on the counter. Later it's gone, and you wonder, did I really see it? Most of the time, the brain's guesses are good enough. They let you move quickly through the world without getting bogged down in unnecessary detail. But those same shortcuts can lead to confident errors. Understanding how the brain completes scenes helps make sense of illusions, eyewitness mistakes, and why attention matters more than raw visual data. It also sets the stage for looking at how memory and expectation further reshape what we think we saw. Tip of the tongue phenomenon. That maddening pause when a word hovers just out of reach. You know it well. Maybe you're mid-story at dinner, you've got the definition and the image, even the first syllable rattling around, and then everything grinds to a halt. Your face goes blank for a second, the conversation feels oddly loud, and your brain seems to be searching in the dark. That's the tip of the tongue phenomenon, and it's both totally normal and surprisingly revealing about how memory works. Here's what's happening behind the scenes. Words aren't stored like labeled folders you can pull out cleanly. Instead, memory is a network of linked pieces: meaning, semantics, sounds, phonology, context, and associated images. When you try to name something, your brain activates a web of related nodes, synonyms, related concepts, even the first letters and the rhythm of the word. Sometimes the semantic side lights up strongly. You know what the thing is, what it does, how it feels. But the phonological node, the exact sound pattern of the word, fails to fully activate. So you can describe the thing, you might even come up with similar words, but the precise word refuses to appear. That partial activation is the classic TOT state. Two common culprits make this worse. First is blocking. A closely related word or a similar sounding candidate jumps in and hogs the retrieval pathway. Instead of the correct word getting the final nudge, a wrong but stronger associate keeps showing up and crowding it out. Second is competition. Multiple possible words are vying at once, and your brain's selection mechanism struggles to pick the winner. Tension turns this small misfire into a full-blown mental stall. When you feel pressured, in a meeting, on a date, or during public speaking, your nervous system kicks up. Moderate arousal can sharpen focus, but high stress floods the system with adrenaline and cortisol, which interfere with the prefrontal cortex's job of managing working memory and guiding retrieval. Your attention narrows, so instead of scanning broadly through associative links, you start probing the same shallow spots over and over. The more you monitor the gap, why can't I think of it? The more cognitive bandwidth you waste on the frustration, not the search. That meta-awareness creates a loop. Anxiety makes recall harder, which raises anxiety, which makes it harder still. It helps to remember this is a retrieval hiccup, not a permanent loss. Often the word pops up later, triggered by an unrelated cue, a change of focus, or simply when you stop trying so hard. Recognizing the mechanics makes it less embarrassing and gives you a simple tool: loosen the grip. Take a breath, give your brain room to wander, and the network often settles into the right pattern on its own. Saying the wrong word. Which brings us to one of my favorite human mistakes: saying the wrong word. You know the one. Mid-sentence, your mouth decides to take a detour and out comes something your brain never actually approved. I once told my boss, "I love this position," when I meant, "I hate this position." The look on his face was purely priceless. Moments like that are embarrassing, sure, but they're also a tiny window into how our brains speak. Speech isn't a carefully typed essay that you polish line by line. It's more like driving on autopilot while you think about the song playing. Your brain predicts what you're going to say before your lips even move, pulling words from memory, filling in grammar, and cueing muscle movements. Usually this prediction engine is fast and flawless, but speed and prediction can collide. When the predicted word outruns the intended one, you get a verbal slip. There are a few common flavors of these slips. Sometimes we anticipate a word we're about to say and use it prematurely. I'm going to bake the cake becomes I'm going to bake the cake. Other times, two words fight and blend into something new. The classic, "you have hissed all my mystery lectures," instead of "you have missed all my history lectures," is a comic example, but it happens in less dramatic ways every day. And then there's the mortifying swap, calling your partner by an ex's name, which feels like your brain reached into the wrong filing cabinet. Why does this happen? Because speech production is predictive and parallel. While you choose a word, your brain is already planning the next several words, even the sounds and breaths needed. It's efficient, fewer delays, smoother conversations, but efficiency sacrifices a little accuracy. Think of it like your phone auto-correcting mid-sentence. Sometimes it gets you, and sometimes it changes duck into something much worse. Fatigue, stress, multitasking, and speaking fast make these slips more likely. I notice I mess up when I'm tired or trying to explain something complicated while also watching the kids. The more you try to force perfect speech under pressure, the more your prediction system might trip over itself. The good news? These slips are perfectly human and often harmless. Laughing them off, correcting yourself, or admitting "that's not what I meant" diffuses the moment. And once you understand that your mouth is often a step ahead of your brain, it's a little easier to forgive yourself and to notice how impressively automatic our communication really is. Misplacing objects in plain sight. You know that maddening moment? You set your keys down, glance at the surface twice, and then, poof, they're gone. Not under a pile of papers, not in a drawer, not even in the couch cushion. You literally looked right at them. That everyday mystery is a perfect example of inattentional blindness, a surprisingly normal, well-documented quirk of attention. Inattentional blindness happens because attention acts like a spotlight. We have limited cognitive resources, so our brains prioritize what's relevant to our current goal. If you walk in thinking, "I need to grab my wallet," your brain tunes into shapes, colors, and locations that match that expectation. Anything that doesn't fit that search template gets filtered out, even if it's sitting in plain view. Classic experiments, like the famous gorilla study where people focused on counting passes failed to notice a person in a gorilla suit, show that attention determines what becomes part of our conscious perception. There are two pieces that matter when keys vanish in front of you. First is selective attention. Your mind sets up an attentional set. If you're mentally scanning for a phone, a wallet, or that one receipt, objects that don't match the set are essentially invisible. Second is encoding failure. Even if your eyes land on the keys, without attention, they aren't encoded into working memory. You didn't form a stable memory trace, so later your brain can't recall seeing them. It's not that your eyes lied, it's that your brain never took a picture. Another little betrayer is saccadic suppression. Every time your eyes jump, those quick saccades, visual processing is briefly reduced. That helps prevent blur, but also makes it easy to miss changes or details during those micro movements. Combine that with automatic habits, for example, a routine route through the kitchen, and you get a perfect storm. Your eyes may be on the counter, but your attention is elsewhere, and you don't register what's there. Stress, fatigue, and multitasking amplify the effect. When my mornings are rushed, I set things down while mentally rehearsing the day's to-do list. I've learned the hard way that a distracted brain is an amnesiac brain. Even emotional states matter. Anxiety narrows attention, focusing on perceived threats and pruning out the mundane, like a set of jingling keys. So why does looking twice sometimes not help? because looking isn't the same as attending. A casual scan may not reset your attentional set. A second glance done while thinking about something else is just another uncommitted eye movement. To actually see, you need intentional attention. Slow the scan, change your expectation, tell yourself, I'm looking for keys, and move your viewpoint. Look from a different angle or touch the surface. Deliberate action forces encoding. Once you intentionally notice an object, it enters working memory and becomes retrievable. This all sounds a bit discouraging until you realize it's predictable, and therefore manageable. Small changes like a single dedicated place for keys, a quick mindful pause before you drop things, or even a tactile check, run your hand across the surface, short-circuit the blind spot. The brain's filtering system keeps us from being overwhelmed. The trick is to bring attention back when it matters. Word substitutions in texting. That same autopilot that helps us multitask shows up loud and clear when we're texting. You think you're composing a careful reply, but your thumbs have their own agenda. Predictive text sits there like a helpful, if overeager, assistant, offering the next word before your brain's even finished the sentence. Meanwhile, motor memory, that subconscious map of where the letters live, is typing a beat ahead of your awareness. The result, weird word swaps that make zero sense and more often than not, are hilarious or mortifying. I can't tell you how many times I've meant to type, I'll be there in a sec, and my phone proudly served up sex instead. Or I tried to tell my friend definitely and it came out as defiantly, which completely changed the tone of the message. Once I texted a coworker about a public event and autocorrect suggested something else entirely. You know the one. And hours of awkward clarification followed. Those moments sting because they feel like your own brain betrayed you, but really it's your thumb and your phone doing their own fast, stale routine. Here's what's happening. Predictive text models make educated guesses based on common phrases and your own typing history. They're optimized for speed, not subtlety. So when you pause, distracted by a thought or whatever's happening around you, the keyboard fills the gap with its best guess. Motor memory compounds the issue. Your thumbs have practiced thousands of tiny movements, so they often land and accept suggestions before your conscious mind has vetted the meaning. Hitting space or a punctuation mark is the final act of trust, a reflex that confirms the suggestion without a double check. And because these systems learn from you, the more you accept a strange suggestion once, the more likely it is to pop up again. That loop explains why you suddenly have a weird signature mistake that shows up in every conversation. It's not laziness. It's the brain optimizing for throughput, not perfect semantics. This is why texting can feel like a comedy of errors. You're half present, your phone is trying to be helpful, and your thumbs are racing ahead. It's relatable because we've all been there. The apology messages, the frantic clarifications, the little mortified laughter when you realize what you actually sent. Recognizing that it's a combo of predictive text and motor habit takes a lot of the shame out of it and, honestly, makes for some great stories. If your messages sometimes look like someone else wrote them, don't panic. It's normal. Next, we'll look at how context and autocorrect history make the problem worse, and a few quick fixes to stop your thumbs from sabotaging you. The wait, did I lock the door glitch. Sometimes automatic mode isn't just convenient. It creates this tiny, infuriating loop in your head. You step out, shove the keys in your pocket, hear the click, walk away, and 3 blocks later, your brain drops a grenade. Did I lock the door? Suddenly, you're backtracking, peeking through windows, or worse, convincing yourself you did it and leaving with that low-grade anxiety humming the whole day. This isn't you being forgetful in a moral sense. It's how memory works when actions become automatic. Repetitive tasks rely more on procedural memory, muscle memory, habits, while episodic memory, the clear snapshot of I did X at Y time, doesn't get formed strongly. The hippocampus, which helps file those snapshots, needs attention and sensory detail to make a durable record. When you're on autopilot, your brain skips the detailed encoding. So the sensory proof that would normally say, yeah, you turned that deadbolt, is weak or missing, and your mind starts fishing for a source. Was it this action? That one? That uncertainty is called a source monitoring error, and it's maddeningly common. I'm guilty of this. I've locked my door, walked 3 blocks, then spent 10 minutes circling the block, performing what I now call the lock-check tango. Once I was late for a meeting and still turned back, only to find the door double locked and my neighbor standing in the doorway like, you okay? It's funny in hindsight, but in the moment, it's not. Your brain becomes a tiny prosecutor, accusing you of negligence with zero evidence. It gets worse when you're stressed, tired, or distracted. Multitasking steals the very attention needed to stamp a memory. The more routine the action, the less unique sensory detail it has, so each locking incident blends into a blur. When your day is full of identical blur moments, your brain simply can't tell this one from the other 99. So what helps? Small, practical fixes that reintroduce sensory proof or create a ritual your brain can latch onto. Add an audible tag. Say the word locked out loud as you turn the key. The verbal cue creates a memory anchor. Make it visual. Pause and look at the deadbolt for a full 2 seconds. That little intentional pause stamps a snapshot. Habit stack. Connect locking the door to a unique physical move. Tap the frame, flip your phone, or put the keys in a specific pocket. Novelty helps in coding. Use external proof. Leave the keys on the table inside or use a smart lock with an app notification. Technology fills the evidence gap. Reduce multitasking. Give yourself 30 focused seconds at the door. It's not dramatic, it's preventive. Be kind to yourself. This happens to everyone. Stress amplifies it, and shame only makes it worse. You're not failing your brain, you're working with it. A few tiny changes convert a blurry routine into a clear memory, and suddenly that nagging loop stops stealing minutes and sanity from your day. Reading, but not processing. Have you ever sat down with a book, moved your eyes smoothly across a page for a good minute, and then realized you have no idea what you just read? That exact, frustrating moment when you have the physical motion of reading. Your eyes are doing the work, but the meaning never lands. I know that feeling well. I'll flip back to reread the same paragraph 3 times, convinced I missed something obvious, only to find my mind had been rehearsing an awkward conversation from yesterday or planning dinner in excruciating detail. What's happening isn't magic, it's neuroscience. There's a brain network researchers call the default mode network, or DMN, and it loves wandering. The DMN is most active when you're not engaged in a focused external task, when you're daydreaming, ruminating, imagining future scenarios, or mentally replaying past events. Reading requires a different system. Attention and working memory have to stay tied to the text so you can build meaning, link sentences, and hold ideas in mind long enough to form understanding. When the DMN starts firing, it hijacks that focus. Your eyes keep moving, because the motor pattern of reading is automatic, but comprehension grinds to a halt. The signs are pretty obvious once you tune into them. You'll recognize it if you find yourself reading the same line twice without realizing it, flipping pages and not knowing what happened on the previous one, remembering only a stray image, a single phrase, or nothing at all. Catching yourself mid-paragraph thinking about something unrelated, a memory, an errand, a worry. That internal drift can be triggered by a bunch of everyday things: fatigue, low interest in the material, emotional stress, or even an especially vivid stray thought. Sometimes the DMN is doing something useful, solving a problem in the background, connecting ideas. But more often when you're trying to read, it's just noise. Neurologically, the DMN and the task-positive networks, the ones that support focused attention, tend to be anti-correlated. When one ramps up, the other backs down. So it feels like your brain's attention is being pulled in 2 opposite directions. I've found it helps to notice the pattern without beating myself up. Zoning out isn't a moral failing or sheer laziness, it's a predictable brain state. The annoying part is that the usual reading loop, eyes move, mind follows, gets interrupted, leaving you with the tired sensation of having read nothing. Once you can name it, you can start to respond. Short breaks, changing physical posture, or asking a question about the paragraph can help flip the switch back to focused mode. But the first step is simply understanding why it happens. That your eyes can be tricked into reading while your brain takes a detour through the default mode network. Hearing words wrongly. A lot of the time, what we hear is less a faithful recording of sound and more a best guess our brain makes based on expectations. Think about the first time you realized you'd been singing the wrong lyrics to a song for years. I once confidently mouthed an entire chorus that I'd understood as "Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza," until someone told me the real words. That sudden, embarrassed correction felt like a collision between what my ears received and what my mind insisted I heard. These moments are examples of phonetic illusions, and they're everywhere. One famous case is the Yanni Laurel clip that blew up online. The exact same audio clip led different people to hear two completely different words. Why? Because tiny acoustic cues can be interpreted multiple ways, and whichever interpretation fits your expectations, recent experiences, or attention wins out. There are a few neat lab tricks scientists use to show how expectation shapes hearing. One is phoneme restoration. Researchers replace a sound in a sentence with brief noise, and people still report hearing the missing sound as if it were there. Your brain doesn't like gaps, it fills them using context. Another is sine wave speech, a garbled, whistling version of language that sounds like nonsense at first. Tell someone it's speech, and suddenly they can hear the words. The same exact waveform, interpreted differently because of what the listener expects. We do this in everyday life too. In noisy rooms, we rely on context, friends' faces, the topic being discussed, the rhythm of speech, to reconstruct words that would otherwise be lost. That's hugely adaptive. Without it, conversations in cafes or on busy streets would be exhausting, but it also leads to predictable mistakes. Hearing "I scream" instead of "ice cream," or the classic Mondegreen, misheard song lyrics that become personal folklore. I still catch myself singing my childhood version of a line and then cracking up when I realize the official words are completely different. You can try a quick experiment at home. Think of a sentence someone would likely say, maybe, "Do you want a cup of tea?" Then listen to a muffled recording where some consonants are reduced. If you prime yourself to expect tea, you'll probably hear that. Prime yourself with key and your perception shifts. It's surprisingly easy to flip what you think you heard. So, what's happening under the hood? The brain runs a constant predictive model. It anticipates upcoming sounds based on language rules, context, and prior experience. Incoming auditory signals are compared to those predictions. When the signal is noisy or ambiguous, the predictions fill in the blanks. That makes perception fast and efficient, but also flexible enough to be tricked. Knowing that expectation sculpts hearing changes how you listen. It makes you more aware that confidence in what you heard isn't always proof you heard correctly, and it sets us up perfectly to explore how visual cues and context can hijack our senses even more. The "why did I open this app" moment. That's the exact setup for the little moment I'm talking about. The "why did I open this app" moment. You know it. You pick up your phone, tap an app, and 5 or 10 minutes later you realize you can't even remember what you meant to do. There wasn't a plan. There was only a trigger. The buzzing, the idle hand, the tiny icon. And your brain followed it into action before it ever checked whether there was a purpose. This is the habit loop in action. Cue, routine, reward. The cue can be obvious, a notification, an incoming message, or it can be almost invisible. Boredom leaning into your palm, the phone sitting on the table, a break between tasks. The routine is the automatic action. Unlock, scroll, swipe, like. And the reward? Often it's not a meaningful payoff. It's a microdose of novelty or relief. The quick hit of dopamine when a new post scrolls into view, the tiny thrill of seeing a message. Those tiny hits reinforce the loop. Over time, your brain learns that the cue predicts a small reward, so it increasingly triggers the behavior without consulting your conscious goal. I do this all the time. I'll be making coffee, reach for my phone because my hand is free, and next thing I know I've watched 3 short videos and I've forgotten whether I was supposed to call someone or check an email. The phone didn't just sit there waiting for instruction. It pulled me into a preset habit. That split second between cue and action is where purpose gets lost. What makes it even sneakier is how quickly our brains rationalize afterward. The moment you notice, wait, why did I open this? Your mind scrambles for a reason. Maybe you tell yourself you were just checking or only for a second. And that narrative feels plausible because the habit already served its reward. But the truth is, the intention often comes after the action, not before it. That mismatch is why we end the day feeling like time slipped through our fingers. Recognizing the loop is the first step. Try this. Next time you reach for your phone, pause before you tap. Not a long lecture, just a 1 or 2 second question. What am I here to do? Naming the intention out loud. Reply to Sam. Set a timer. Read 1 article. Activates your conscious brain and interrupts the automatic pathway. If there's no clear purpose, consider putting the phone down. Small friction helps too. Moving an app off your home screen, turning off non-essential notifications, or leaving your phone in another room for a specific task reduces those unconscious cues. And when you do give yourself permission to use apps, make it deliberate. Set a timer and commit to the purpose you named. That way, the loop becomes a tool instead of a trap. This moment, the one where you ask yourself why, is a diagnostic light. It tells you where attention is being hijacked. Once you catch it regularly, you start to reclaim those minutes that otherwise evaporate into the endless scroll. The Stroop effect. Try this. I'll flash a list of color words on the screen. Blue, red, green. But each word is printed in a different ink color. Your job is to say the ink color out loud, not read the word. Sounds simple, right? For most people, that split-second flinch happens. Your mouth wants to read the word instead of naming the color. That hiccup is the Stroop effect in action. And it's secretly hilarious when you notice how stubborn your brain can be. Why does this happen? Because 2 things are competing inside your head. Reading is something your brain did 1,000 times as a kid until it became automatic. The moment you see the letters BLUE, a cascade of reading processes kicks in without you asking. Naming the ink color, though, is a less practiced task. It needs your attention and deliberate control. When both signals point to different answers, the word says blue, but the ink is red, your brain experiences interference. The automatic reading process pulls one way, the controlled color naming process pulls the other. That tension slows you down and makes mistakes more likely. I remember trying this in a psychology class and laughing at myself every time. I'd blurt blue while the instructor pointed out the red ink. It felt like my brain was stuttering. 2 voices arguing over who gets to answer. That really captures the essence. Automatic processing is fast, effortless, and hard to override. Controlled processing is slower, effortful, and requires attention and control. On a brain level, researchers think the anterior cingulate cortex acts like a conflict detector. It notices when these competing responses disagree. Then the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive manager, steps in to resolve the conflict and implement the correct response. That extra negotiation is what adds time and opens the door to mistakes. The Stroop effect isn't just a lab trick, it shows up in everyday life whenever a habitual response conflicts with what the situation demands. Think of checking your phone when it buzzes while you're trying to have a conversation, or automatically reaching for the brake when you see flashing lights in your rearview mirror, even though the road is clear. The faster, automatic response is useful most of the time, but it becomes a problem when we need to override it. You can also try a quick experiment at home. Write the name of a color on a sticky note with a marker of a different color. Stick it on the fridge and time how long it takes you to name the ink color versus when the word and ink match. Most people will notice a small but consistent slowdown when they're forced to suppress the automatic reading response. Why care about this? Because the Stroop effect exposes a fundamental truth about mental control. Being able to override habit is a core part of cognitive flexibility. It explains why breaking a bad habit is hard, why distractions derail us, and why learning to pause and choose our actions consciously can make a real difference. Next, we'll look at strategies your brain uses to get better at this. How practice, focus, and even mental cues can shrink that stutter and help control win out over habit. Phantom vibration syndrome. A lot of us have felt it, that little buzz on your thigh when your phone isn't even in your pocket. You reach, check, and there's nothing. That's phantom vibration syndrome, and it's a tiny miracle of how expectation rewires perception. Think about what happens when you start checking your phone obsessively. Each time you scramble for it, your brain tags that moment as important. A cue, buzz, followed by the reward, message like, or escape from boredom. That pattern, cue, action, reward, is the textbook recipe for conditioning. After enough repeats, your nervous system becomes primed. Your attention background thumps your body for anything that resembles a phone alert. But it's not magic, it's prediction. The brain is constantly guessing what will happen next. It builds models from past experience and uses them to interpret noisy sensory input. When you expect a vibration, the threshold for feeling one drops. A soft pressure from clothing, a muscle twitch, or even the sensation of your leg moving can get interpreted as a phone buzz because your brain is on the lookout for exactly that signal. In signal detection terms, you've lowered the bar. More hits, but also way more false alarms. I remember sitting through a long meeting, convincing myself I'd stop checking. My hand kept drifting to my pocket anyway. Every time the group shifted, I felt a phantom buzz and pulled out my phone, feeling ridiculous when the screen showed nothing. Later, I realized my anxiety about missing something important had literally trained my nerves to hallucinate alerts. On a physiological level, this happens because attention and expectation modulate activity in sensory brain areas. The somatosensory cortex, thalamus, even spinal reflexes. Those areas don't get raw data in isolation. They get predictions and error signals. When the prediction, expecting a buzz, is strong, minor random inputs are amplified to match it. The result feels real. You sense the vibration even though the physical event never occurred. There's also a social angle. Phones are mapped to social reward. Messages mean connection, status, or relief from awkward silence. That social weighting increases the brain's motivation to detect phone signals, so your nervous system becomes hypervigilant. Sleep-deprived nights, busy days, or high-stress periods make it worse. When you're anxious, your brain favors detection over accuracy, making phantom alerts more frequent. This behavior becomes self-reinforcing. Each false alarm prompts another check, which reinforces the idea that checking will yield something important. Over time, the checking habit and the sensory false alarms feed into each other, like a loop you can't hear and can't stop. The takeaway is oddly hopeful. These hallucinations are not signs of weakness or craziness. They're proof your brain is adaptive, learning what you value. The flip side is that you can unlearn it. Reducing the expectation, setting quiet hours, turning off non-essential notifications, or simply putting the phone out of reach during focused time lowers that prediction signal, and with it, the phantom buzzes. So next time you feel that phantom vibration, instead of panicking, notice it. Recognize it as a conditioned response. The sensation is real in your nervous system, but the alert is not. That awareness is the first step in breaking a loop your nerves made for you. The Mandela effect. Which brings us to something that feels like a glitch in the fabric of shared memory, the Mandela effect. You've probably had that weird moment where you're certain of a detail from your childhood, and then someone else tells you you're wrong, and suddenly a whole crowd chimes in agreeing with them. That's not just discomfort, it's a collective false memory, when large groups remember the same thing incorrectly. I'll be honest, I used to argue, passionately, that the children's book series was spelled Berenstain Bears. I could picture the cover in my head, the Stein ending, and I would have defended it like it was a family heirloom. Then someone posted the original covers, and I saw Berenstain. I felt a tiny part of my brain rearrange itself. Later, in a comment thread, dozens of people shared the exact same conviction. That's the Mandela effect in action. Many people remembering the same incorrect detail. The term came from people who were certain Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, even though he was released and later became president. That mismatch between personal memory and recorded history, multiplied across crowds, is what gives the phenomenon its power. Examples pop up everywhere. Luke, I am your father, when the line is actually, no, I am your father. Or the Monopoly guy supposedly having a monocle when he doesn't. Or the colour chartreuse being remembered as a pinkish hue instead of neon green. These aren't just funny trivia errors. They reveal how memory isn't a camera but a story we tell ourselves and others help write. So how does this happen? A few interpersonal and cognitive forces team up. First, memory is reconstructive. When we recall something, we rebuild it from pieces instead of replaying an exact file. That reconstruction relies on cues, context, emotion, other memories, and it's messy. Second, social reinforcement plays a huge role. We talk about our memories. When someone confidently states a detail, especially someone we trust or a large online group, our brains often conform to the group narrative. This is memory conformity. You hear a confident account and your recollection shifts to match it. There are also source monitoring errors. You might remember the content of a movie or conversation, but forget where that detail came from. Your own memory, a parody, a fan-made image, or even a commercial. Over time, repeated mentions on forums or social media make the incorrect version feel more legitimate. Platforms that prioritize viral claims can accelerate this, so an invented meme or a miscaptioned image spreads and becomes the new truth for thousands. Psychologists like Elizabeth Loftus have shown how malleable memory can be. False details can be implanted or reinforced through suggestion. The Mandela effect is essentially this phenomenon on a societal scale. It's not about mass lying, it's about shared reconstruction. When dozens, hundreds, or thousands of people mutually validate a memory, that validation rewrites the shared reality in subtle ways. What's fascinating, and a little unsettling, is the consequence. Collective false memories can shape culture, influence eyewitness accounts, and even alter how history is remembered by everyday people. That doesn't mean history changes, but people's versions of it do. The best response isn't to mock someone for being wrong, but to recognize how human memory works. Ask where the memory came from, look for original sources, and be open to being surprised. Next, we'll look at how these shared distortions scale in the age of social media, where a single viral post can create millions of converging memories overnight. Earworms and musical stuck loops. Have you ever been halfway through a meeting or doing the dishes when a tiny chorus drops into your head and refuses to leave? I have. Once it was a commercial jingle that showed up and looped for hours while I tried to concentrate. Those tiny sticky songs are called earworms, or more formally, involuntary musical imagery, INMI. They're not just annoying. they reveal something neat about how your brain handles rhythm and expectation. At the heart of an earworm is an unfinished pattern. Music builds expectation, a beat, a melody that suggests where it wants to go. When your brain hears an incomplete or unresolved piece, a catchy hook, a fragment of lyrics, a syncopated rhythm, it tries to predict the next note. If the prediction can't be satisfied because you only heard a clip or your attention was pulled away, your brain keeps running the loop to complete the pattern. Think of it like a movie that paused at a cliffhanger. Your mind keeps replaying scenes trying to find the ending. This isn't just metaphor. Neuroscience shows auditory and motor areas light up during earworms. Your brain simulates the act of singing or tapping, which helps explain why you sometimes feel the urge to hum or move your foot. The Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones, works the same way with music. An incomplete musical phrase is an unresolved job for your predictive system, and repetition is the brain's attempt to finish the task. So why some songs, not others? Emotion and context matter. A melody tied to strong feelings, novelty, or a recent encounter, you overheard a snippet, watched a short clip, is more likely to stick. Mental state matters too. Boredom, stress, or repetitive activities like walking or commuting create mental space where a tune can loop uninterrupted. Luckily, there are practical tricks that actually work because they give the brain closure or occupy the predictive machinery. One of the simplest, listen to the whole song. Letting the pattern resolve fulfills the brain's need for completion. If that's not an option, try singing the irritating fragment out loud or hum the missing part until it feels finished. Engaging working memory with another task, a crossword, reading a paragraph, or doing a quick mental math problem can overwrite the loop. Some studies even suggest chewing gum might reduce earworms because it interferes with subvocal rehearsal, though results vary. My go-to when a jingle won't quit is to play the full track once, then switch to a podcast that demands attention. Often, that's enough to break the loop and replace it with something I chose. If you're worried about a song taking over your day, try that. Give your brain its ending, or hand it a new job to focus on. Understanding why earworms happen, your brain completing unfinished rhythmic patterns, makes them less mysterious and a little less maddening. It's not that you're losing control, it's your prediction engine trying to tidy up. Next, we'll look at how rhythm and movement team up to lock songs in even more tightly, and what that means when you're trying to learn music or just get a tune out of your head. Cognitive tunneling. Cognitive tunneling is what happens when focus becomes a kind of blindness. You lock onto one tiny detail, a blinking light, a single sentence, the exact wording of an email, and everything else quietly slips out of view. It's not that you choose to ignore the rest. Your brain literally filters it away so that the thing you're focused on gets more processing power. That's useful a lot of the time. It helps you finish that paragraph, steer through traffic, or fix the one bug that keeps crashing your app. But it comes with a cost. While your mental spotlight is bright and intense, the rest of the room goes dark. Think about an ordinary moment. You're looking for your phone. You crouch by the couch, scanning under every cushion with laser intensity. 10 minutes later, you look up, still convinced it must be under the couch, until someone points out your phone, right where you left it on the kitchen counter. Your brain had filtered the counter out because it was busy with the couch. That little absurd scene is the everyday form of cognitive tunneling. It's embarrassingly common, and it's why we all say things like, "I could have sworn I checked that." In higher stakes situations, the same mechanism is exactly why smart, experienced people make baffling mistakes. Pilots can fly perfectly for hours and then miss a critical indicator because their attention is glued to one gauge. Surgeons can focus on a tricky area and not notice a monitor trending toward danger. Drivers fixate on the car ahead and don't register a pedestrian stepping off the curb. The mind's efficiency becomes selective blindness. There are two things that push us into this tunnel. One is arousal, stress, urgency, pressure, which narrows the attentional field. When your heart rate goes up, your brain defaults to the simplest, most immediate cue. The other is familiarity. The more confident you are about a task, the less likely you are to consciously scan for anomalies. That's why routine jobs are surprisingly risky, because your brain assumes the environment is stable and filters out anything that contradicts that assumption. It's also why so many I didn't see it stories feel plausible. We confuse attention with awareness. We assume because we were looking at a scene, we absorbed all of it. But attention is selective. You can be staring at a dashboard and be unaware of a warning light because your focus was on one readout. You can be in a meeting and miss the moment when someone subtly objects because your thoughts were on the next slide. Later, we'll get into practical ways to widen that spotlight. For now, notice that cognitive tunneling isn't a flaw in character. It's a feature of how brains cope with complexity. Recognizing it is the first step toward avoiding those moments when focus turns into blindness. The spotlight effect. Have you ever spilled coffee on your shirt right before an important meeting and felt like everyone in the room will remember it forever? I have, painfully. I still remember rushing in, trying to dab the stain with napkins, convinced that every head turned and every thought was about my clumsy moment. Later, when I replayed it in my head, I was surprised to discover that most people barely noticed. Some had seen it for a second, others didn't notice at all. The truth felt humbling. I had been the only person treating it like a national crisis. That gut reaction, believing you're under a microscope when you're not, is called the spotlight effect. It's a cognitive distortion that makes small mistakes feel monumental. Your mind amplifies the significance of social blunders because your internal world is on loop. You replay the spill, the stumble, the awkward comment, and your brain assumes everyone else is watching that loop too. Why does this happen? Partly because we live inside our own heads. You experience every thought, blush, and hesitation up close and in high definition. You don't get that same access to other people's thoughts, so your internal awareness becomes a misleading measure of other people's attention. Also, evolution nudged us to care about social standing, back when being ostracized could mean real danger, so our brains are wired to be hyper-alert to how we appear. Here's the key. People are surprisingly forgiving and forgetful. Most folks are focused on their own lives, their own small dramas. That person who glanced at the spilled coffee probably shrugged and went back to their phone. The person you think will remember your awkward joke is likely already thinking about dinner. In other words, your perceived humiliation rarely becomes anyone else's lasting narrative. A quick, practical exercise I use, right after a cringe moment, give yourself a 5-minute reality check. Ask, what's the worst that could happen? Then ask, how likely is that? Finally, play the role of an impartial observer. What would I actually notice if I weren't stressed about it? Often, the answers are far less catastrophic than your first reaction. Another simple strategy is rehearsal. Imagine the worst-case scenario and then visualize handling it smoothly. That reduces the shock if something goes awry and shrinks the size of the mistake in your mind. And if you want to be extra kind to yourself, remember that most people will forget your blunder faster than you do. So next time you feel like the world is staring, remind yourself, the spotlight is dimmer than you think. That small misstep is usually just a blip, not the headline you've made it out to be. The phantom smell phenomenon. A while ago, I was working late, cramming for a deadline, when I suddenly caught a sharp whiff of cigarette smoke. I jumped up, heart racing, looking for the source. No one had been near the room, the windows were closed, and there was nothing smouldering. After a few minutes, it faded, and I shrugged it off. Later that week, stressed and exhausted, I smelled the same thing again. That's when I learned about olfactory hallucinations. Phantosmia, the brain's ability to conjure smells that aren't actually there. Think about how distinct smell is as a memory trigger. A single scent can throw you back to a kitchen, a childhood holiday, or a first kiss. That intensity comes from how smell is wired in the brain. The olfactory bulb feeds directly into the hippocampus and amygdala, the areas that handle memory and emotion. So, unlike sight or sound, smell is tightly bound to our emotional history. When the brain taps those circuits, because of a memory, anxiety, or even random neural noise, it can create a sensory experience that feels real. The key idea is top-down processing. Our brains are prediction machines. If you often drink coffee while reading emails, your brain starts to expect the smell of coffee in that context. When you're tired or anxious, those predictions can get louder, and sometimes they override the actual sensory input. In other words, your brain can produce the sensation of a smell purely from expectation or recall, without any odor molecules reaching your nose. Stress is a common trigger. When you're tense, your nervous system amps up and those memory emotion circuits become hyperactive. For some people that means nostalgic, pleasant phantom scents. For others it manifests as unpleasant odors like burning or rotting. Why our brains pick those particular smells isn't fully sorted out, but the emotional salience helps explain it. Migraines, sinus issues, infections. Some people notice this after COVID, and certain medications can also make these phantom smells more likely. Basically, anything that disrupts normal olfactory processing can open the door to smell illusions. Here's a small, harmless experiment you can try at home. Close your eyes. Think about a lemon. Really picture its color, the texture, how you'd peel it, and try to imagine its scent. Many people will report a faint citrus whiff, or at least a strong impression of smell. That's your brain creating a sensory experience from memory. Some people can produce vivid, imagined smells. Others barely sense anything. Either way, it proves a point. Sensory experience doesn't always need outside stimuli. It can arise from inside your head. If these phantom smells are fleeting and infrequent, they're often just a quirky brain trick. But if they're persistent, distressing, or accompanied by other symptoms, memory changes, headaches, or balance issues, it's worth checking in with a healthcare professional. For most of us, though, knowing that our brains can generate smells helps make sense of those sudden, inexplicable whiffs, and reminds us how tightly perception and memory are braided together. Transitioning from that, let's look at how other senses play the same trick and why our brains sometimes prefer imagined input over reality. The word frequency illusion in conversation. That leads straight into something everyone notices but rarely names. The moment you learn a new slang or phrase, and suddenly it's everywhere. I remember the first time someone told me, "That's giving." I thought, cute. Then 2 days later I heard it in a podcast, a friend used it at brunch, and even a YouTube ad dropped it like it was the evening news. It felt like the universe was conspiring to make me notice that phrase non-stop. That feeling has a name, the word frequency illusion, sometimes called the Baader Meinhof Phenomenon. But the name isn't as interesting as what it reveals about how our brains work. Once your mind latches onto a pattern, any pattern, it begins to highlight it. You start selectively paying attention to instances that confirm the pattern and ignoring all the times it's not there. The world hasn't suddenly changed. Your attention has. Think about conversations. A roommate says "big yikes" once and you smile. Then at dinner, you hear it again from someone else and you laugh, surprised. It's not that everyone suddenly agreed to adopt that phrase. It's that your brain is now primed to recognize it. Your ears perk up. Your social radar flags every use as meaningful. That bias toward pattern confirmation is powerful because it feels like proof. The repetition feels organic and social, so you start using the phrase too, and the loop continues. There's something intimate about this process. Language is a social glue, and noticing the same words in new places makes us feel part of a trend or in on a joke. I've used this to my advantage. When I'm trying to fit into a new group, I'll naturally mirror their language. It's an unconscious shortcut for belonging. But it can also lead you into false conclusions. Thinking a phrase is more common than it actually is, or that an idea is more accepted than it is, because your brain rewards patterns. It's also worth calling out the flip side. Marketers, influencers, and even algorithms know this trick. They seed a phrase, and our attention does the rest, amplifying perceived frequency. That's why some memes feel like they explode overnight. They don't always. We just suddenly notice them everywhere. If you want to test this for yourself, try a small experiment. Pick a harmless word, seriously, legend, or something silly, and note every time you hear it in a day. You'll probably notice a spike right after you pick it. That's not magic, it's how our minds filter reality. Understanding the word frequency illusion doesn't take the fun out of language. It makes social trends less mysterious and more understandable. It also gives you a bit of control. Knowing how your attention tricks you lets you decide whether to join the trend or just smile and move on. Next, we'll look at how this same pattern confirmation bias affects the stories we tell ourselves about other people. Auditory pareidolia. We just talked about how our eyes love to find faces and stories in random patterns. The same mental habit shows up with our ears. Auditory pareidolia is that weird little moment when you swear the radio is saying your name or the wind outside sounds like someone whispering secrets. It's not supernatural, it's your brain doing its favorite thing, turning noise into narrative. Think about times you've misheard song lyrics. I used to belt out a chorus convinced it said something completely different and only later learned I'd been singing the wrong words for years. Those mondegreens are basically musical cousins of hearing a voice in static, or walking down a crowded street and pausing because you thought someone called you, then realizing no one did. That jolt, that instant of recognition feels real because your brain is tuned to prioritize meaningful sounds, voices, names, alarms. It's easier to be safe by assuming the rustle might be a threat or a person than to ignore it and be wrong. Late at night, this gets extra spooky. I'll lie awake and the furnaces rattle, the distant traffic, even the hum of the fridge start to arrange into syllables. In the dark, with fewer visual cues, our auditory system grabs more responsibility. Static on an old radio can seem to form whispers. People have even recorded white noise and claim to hear full sentences when they listen repeatedly. The brain fills in gaps, matching fragments of sound to patterns it knows, vowels, consonant shapes, familiar rhythms. Once a hint of a human cadence appears, everything else rearranges itself to fit. There's an evolutionary reason for this. Our ancestors, who were quick to notice a twig snap or a distant murmur, even if it was just wind, had an edge. Being overly suspicious is safer than being naively calm. The cost of a false alarm is usually small compared to the cost of missing a real call for help. That bias toward better safe than sorry left us with an overactive interpreter in the brain, always looking for signals in the static. That tendency shapes our emotional life too. Sometimes it comforts. A lonely camper hears voices and feels less alone. Sometimes it unnerves. A homeowner hears whispers in the walls and imagines someone else is there. Knowing it's normal doesn't always stop the goosebumps, but it can flip the narrative from something supernatural to something predictable about how my brain works. If you want to try it yourself, play a recording of white noise or rain and listen in a quiet room. After a minute or two, your mind will start to latch onto shapes, a laugh, a name, a tune. Don't force it. The trick is that these impressions pop up when you're not actively searching. And when they do, remember, the message is less important than the machinery that created it. Mind wandering while driving. Have you ever pulled into a parking lot, reached for your keys, and realized you can't remember most of the drive? That eerie, "how did I get here?" feeling is more common than you think. It's called highway hypnosis, or sometimes white line fever, and it happens when your conscious mind checks out while the subconscious keeps the car moving. Here's what it feels like to me. You're cruising on a long stretch of road. Maybe it's familiar, maybe it's late, and the scenery is steady and unchanging. Your thoughts drift to work, a fight with a friend, or a podcast. Minutes pass. Suddenly, you're at the exit you meant to take, or you find yourself farther down the highway than you intended, and there's a weird blank in your memory. The body did the driving, your mind was somewhere else entirely. Why does this happen? Driving, especially on monotonous roads, becomes an automatic task once you've done it 1,000 times. Your brain shifts control to lower-level processes that handle steering, speed, and small corrections without using much conscious attention. That frees your mind to wander. And thanks to the brain's default mode system, it will fill that open space with daydreams, worries, plans, or replayed conversations. Usually that's harmless. With a wheel and dozens of tons of metal around you, it's not harmless at all. Highway hypnosis sits in a grey area between focused driving and sleep. It's different from falling asleep at the wheel, but it shares the same risk of delayed reactions. People report missing exits, ignoring brake lights, or reacting late to sudden hazards because their attention was elsewhere. I remember once driving late after a long day, convinced I was alert because I wasn't tired enough to nod off, only to realize I'd driven past my turn twice. That small slip could have been one bad merge from changing lanes into a different lane of traffic. There are some telltale signs to watch for: feeling detached from the driving task, time distortion, hours feeling like minutes, repeatedly missing landmarks or road signs, and a sudden jolt back into focus when you notice something dangerous. Monotony, fatigue, long solo drives, heavy traffic that's moving at a steady pace, and even cruise control can increase the chance of sliding into that autopilot state. So what can you do? First, plan for it. If you know you're doing a long, boring stretch, build in regular breaks. Even a 5 to 10 minute walk and some fresh air can reset your attention. Switch up the environment, open a window, change the music, or roll down the window and talk out loud about your route to keep your brain engaged. If you start feeling spaced out, pull over safely. A quick nap or a short walk is a lot cheaper than a mistake on the road. Finally, don't beat yourself up if it happens. It's a human thing, not a moral failing. The important part is recognizing it and treating it like any other driving hazard. Prevent it when you can, and act quickly if you notice it starting. Your brain wants to wander, that's natural. But when you're behind the wheel, the safest choice is to keep steering your attention where it belongs. The second guess effect. We've all been there, sitting at a multiple choice test, picking answer B, then staring at it until it morphs into D, or choosing to text someone first and then deleting the message because what if they think I'm needy? That hesitation, that itch to check again, is the heart of the second guess effect. Here's the thing I learned the hard way. Your first instinct is usually the best one. It's not mystical. It's your brain doing pattern recognition based on everything you've absorbed. When I worked retail, I'd glance at a customer's problem and know within seconds what would fix it. The few times I overthought it, I ended up suggesting something more complicated and wrong. Anxiety had slipped in and replaced the quick, accurate intuition. Why does this happen? When you doubt your first choice, anxiety floods working memory with what-ifs and imagined outcomes. That noise makes it harder to access the original cues that led to the right answer. Instead of evaluating the actual evidence, you start chasing unlikely scenarios. Small uncertainties snowball into big mistakes because thinking itself becomes distorted by fear of being wrong. This plays out in lots of everyday situations, changing answers on tests, rewording emails until they lose meaning, or hesitating in a game-winning shot. Athletes call it paralysis by analysis. Decisions that should be automatic get overloaded with imagined consequences. Social pressure and perfectionism stoke the doubt even more. We don't want to feel embarrassed, so we over-edit ourselves into poor choices. So what helps? First, recognize the pattern. When you notice yourself leaning toward a change, pause and ask, am I correcting a real error, or am I avoiding the discomfort of being wrong? Second, create a quick checkpoint. Give yourself 20-30 seconds to find concrete evidence that your first choice is actually wrong. If you can't, trust your gut and move on. Third, Practice decision calibration in low-stakes situations. Make a snap choice about what to eat, which route to take, or which shirt to wear. Track outcomes and build confidence in your instincts. Finally, use a breathing trick. One slow exhale clears a surprising amount of anxious clutter and lets the instinctive answer come back into focus. I do this before hitting send on an email I'm tempted to rewrite for the 10th time. Think of a recent moment you changed your mind. Did anxiety drive that switch? We'll use that observation in the next segment to build a tiny routine that helps you keep good instincts and ditch the needless second-guessing. The visual snow effect. I remember the first time I noticed it, standing in a dimly lit kitchen, rubbing my eyes, and feeling like the air itself was made of tiny, restless static. Not from the TV, not from a radio, but from my own vision. Thousands of minuscule flickering dots filling the whole scene, like an old film reel gone noisy. For a few seconds I thought it was fatigue. Then it didn't go away. That's the core of visual snow, a persistent, grainy layer over your entire visual field. Some people describe it as film grain, TV static, or tiny flashing pixels. For others, it's accompanied by shimmering, trailing afterimages when things move, palinopsia, light sensitivity, or faint floaters that feel more like a wash of visual snow. It's usually worse in low-light conditions when the brain has less external information to work with and the noise becomes more noticeable. What's fascinating, and also unnerving, is what visual snow reveals about perception itself. Our brains are electrical organs. Every sight, sound, or touch is translated into electrical signals that race across networks of neurons. But those signals aren't pristine, they're noisy. The nervous system is constantly sorting, amplifying, and suppressing electrical chatter to construct a coherent picture of the world. We don't see raw photons, we see the brain's best guess. Visual snow, at its simplest, looks like a glitch where that filtering system misfires. Instead of smoothing out the static, circuits in the visual pathway, from the thalamus to the visual cortex, seem to be overactive or dysregulated, allowing background noise to persist as part of conscious perception. Researchers use terms like cortical hyperexcitability or dysrhythmia, but the intuitive takeaway is this. What we call clear vision is actually order imposed on a sea of electrical noise. Visual snow makes that invisible process suddenly visible. That realization is both humbling and oddly consoling. It shows how fragile and creative perception really is. It also explains why people with visual snow can feel isolated. When you tell someone you see constant static, the normal reaction is confusion, because most people's brains do an invisible job so well they don't notice it. That gap can make the experience feel unreal, like a private hallucination. I've heard friends describe a creeping anxiety the first time it didn't vanish, a worry that something catastrophic was happening. Often, it's not the eyes themselves failing, but the brain's interpretation shifting. There's no one-size-fits-all cure, and that can be frustrating. Some find relief with tinted lenses that reduce certain wavelengths, others with medications that calm neuronal excitability, and many benefit from lifestyle changes, sleep, stress management, and controlled screen time. Importantly, acknowledging the condition and hearing that it's a recognized neurological phenomenon can be the first step out of isolation. If nothing else, visual snow is a striking reminder. What we call reality is an interpretation, electrical noise given shape by the mind. Understanding that makes our everyday, ordinary seeing feel a little more miraculous and a little more fragile, and that fragility brings us to the next thread, how the brain learns to impose meaning on chaos, turning ambiguity into the confident narratives we carry through life. Phantom touch illusion. Take that idea of empathy a notch further. Sometimes your eyes do more than understand someone else's feelings. They can actually make your body feel those feelings. I still remember the first time it happened to me. I was watching a street performer get his cheek shaved as part of a trick, and halfway through something weird happened. My own cheek prickled like I'd just felt a razor pass by. I froze, convinced someone had brushed me, but nothing had. That little ghost of touch is what scientists call the phantom touch illusion. The phenomenon isn't magic. When you watch someone being touched, a hand brushing a shoulder, a brush stroking a cheek, someone getting lightly poked, parts of your brain that normally process touch can light up as if you were the one being touched. Researchers find that observing touch activates the somatosensory cortex, the brain area that maps sensations on your body. In other words, your brain sometimes can't tell the difference between I see touch and I feel touch. For a small number of people, this crossover is very strong, a condition called mirror touch synesthesia, where seeing touch reliably produces an actual tactile feeling. For most of us, it's subtler, a prickle, an itch, a vague pressure. Why does this happen? It's tied to the mirror systems in the brain, networks that simulate others' actions and sensations to help us understand them. That simulation is useful. It helps you predict and empathize. But sometimes the simulation spills into your own sensory maps. The effect is stronger when you're paying attention, when the person you're watching is someone you identify with, a friend, family member, or someone of the same gender, or when you're already in a heightened emotional state. Ever felt a sudden urge to scratch when a loved one starts scratching? That's the same basic mechanism at work. You can try a tiny experiment right now. Watch a slow-motion clip of someone lightly running their fingers down their arm, or watch a video of someone having their face brushed. Sit quietly and pay attention to your own skin. Do you notice a little tingle, a coolness, or an urge to move? Don't force it. Let the sensation arise. For some people, it's fleeting and subtle. For others, it can be surprisingly vivid. The phantom touch illusion reveals something fundamental. Our bodies and brains are wired to borrow information from the outside world to build internal experience. Visual empathy doesn't just inform your mind about another person's state. It can temporarily rewrite the sensory map of your own body. That blur between seeing and feeling can deepen connection, but it also explains why certain images make us uncomfortable or why we flinch at someone else's pain. Pay attention to it the next time it happens. You'll get a tiny, unforgettable lesson in how connected our minds and bodies really are. Dream lag. That brings us to dream lag. That odd little delay where your brain serves up yesterday's news or last week's. You've probably noticed it. You have a small but strange interaction, nothing huge, and instead of showing up in a dream that night, it sneaks back into your sleep a few days later, dressed in metaphors. That's not coincidence. It's how REM sleep edits your memory timeline. Here's an example I keep thinking about. I once had an awkward conversation with a coworker on Monday. I replayed it in my head that evening, felt embarrassed, and thought I'd dealt with it. Nothing in the dream that night. Then Friday morning I woke up from a dream where the office turned into a playground and that coworker was a towering slide I couldn't climb. It felt silly, but emotionally I woke up lighter. The anxiety had shifted from sharp embarrassment to something I could laugh at. That's dream lag in action. Scientists call this the dream lag effect. Immediate experiences often show up quickly in dreams as day residue. The things we dream about within a night or two. But emotional or personally relevant events can re-emerge in REM sleep several days later, often around 5 to 7 days. During REM, the brain seems to be doing a delayed pass, replaying, reweighing, and re-encoding memories not just for accuracy, but for emotional meaning. Mechanically, it's rooted in how memory consolidation works. Waking experiences are first captured by short-term memory centers. Over the following days, these traces are reactivated and talked over with emotional centers like the amygdala during REM, which is when dreams are richest and our brain's narrative-making machinery is most active. The result? Your memory timeline gets rearranged. Rather than perfectly logging events in chronological order, your brain integrates feelings, priorities, and associations, and sometimes rewrites the scene into something symbolic or surprising. That process is why a dream from 5 days after an argument might give you the emotional resolution you didn't get in the moment. You might not suddenly remember new facts, but your reaction changes. The dream turns raw worry into a stitched-together story, and you wake up with a different perspective, less reactive or sometimes more aware of what still bothers you. This is also why some persistent worries or unresolved feelings can haunt your dreams for days, showing up again and again in different guises. Your brain knows the issue needs more processing, so it keeps inviting the topic back into REM to keep working on it. That repetition isn't punishment. It's mental rehearsal, a way to integrate difficult material with the rest of your life narrative. If you want to make this useful, notice patterns. Keep a simple dream note for a week after an emotionally charged event. Watch how the same theme morphs and what emotional shift happens. You might be surprised to discover that what felt overwhelming at first becomes manageable after a few nights of REM editing. Dream lag is basically permission to be patient with your feelings. Emotions don't always get sorted immediately. They're sometimes processed in the background on their own timetable. Sleep isn't just rest. It's your brain's slow, creative editor, smoothing rough edges and helping you wake up a bit more whole. The mirror movement glitch. Have you ever watched someone scratch an itch on their arm and felt your own arm twitch as if you needed to scratch too? Or sat beside a friend who yawned and suddenly your jaw loosened without you meaning to? That jolt, a tiny, almost embarrassing reflex, is more than coincidence. It's your brain doing a quick identity swap, briefly borrowing someone else's movements and running them through your own motor system. Scientists call it the mirror phenomenon, and at its heart are mirror neurons, cells that fire both when you do something and when you watch someone else do the same thing. I remember sitting in a coffee shop watching a barista steam milk. The rhythmic motion was hypnotic. A second later, my wrist started to move like it was mimicking her. I didn't actually get up and do it, but there was that slight twitch, that urge to copy. That's mirror circuitry at work. Premotor and parietal areas of the brain light up when you observe actions, creating a kind of internal rehearsal. Your brain simulates the movement as if it were happening to you, down to the micro-activation of muscles. Most of the time, this stays sub-threshold, meaning it doesn't produce full-blown action. But sometimes it leaks out as a tiny twitch, a facial micro-movement, or the inexplicable urge to copy. This blending of observation and imitation is useful. It helps babies learn by watching. Athletes refine moves by studying pros, and dancers sync with each other without thinking. It's also the neural basis of empathy. Mirroring someone's expressions or gestures helps you understand what they're feeling. But it has a glitchy side. When you're exhausted or distracted, your inhibitory control weakens, and those simulated actions are more likely to spill over into real movement. That's why yawns spread like wildfire, and why you might start tapping your foot when a friend drums a rhythm on the table. Not all movements trigger the same level of mirroring. Familiar or socially relevant actions, things you've practiced or that belong to people you care about, tend to produce stronger mirroring. That's why you're more likely to mimic your partner's mannerisms than a stranger's. Context matters too. If you're focused on the meaning of what you're watching, your mirror system engages less than if you're focused on the physical motion. Your brain is constantly balancing simulation with inhibition. If that twitch ever makes you self-conscious, there are simple tricks. Shift your gaze to a neutral object, deliberately make a small, different movement, or take a slow, deep breath to engage control networks and dampen the automatic response. Knowing why it happens, that your brain is wired to simulate and learn from others, turns an awkward moment into a fascinating reminder that our brains are built for connection. Next, we'll look at how this automatic mirroring can shape social behavior in surprising ways, and how it can be harnessed to improve learning and communication. Automatic typing errors. Automatic typing errors are one of those sneaky little things that make you wonder if your hands have a life separate from your brain. You mean to type from, and your fingers on autopilot deliver form. You swear you typed meeting, but the message goes out with me-eating. That disconnect, where motor memory overrides intent, is exactly what we're dealing with here. Think about how you learned to type. Early on, you had to consciously find each key. Over time, those movements got carved into muscle memory. Your fingers learned patterns, common letter pairings, shortcuts, the rhythm of your typical words. That's hugely efficient most of the time. But it also creates expectations. When your brain anticipates the next word or letter, it fills gaps for you. Your eyes might scan a sentence and see the intended word rather than the actual letters on the screen. So when you skim, your brain autocorrects what it expects to see before your conscious mind even notices the mismatch. I get this all the time. A few weeks ago, I sent a draft to a collaborator and later realized I had typed pubic strategy instead of public strategy. My eyes skimmed it during editing and never flagged it because my brain simply patched the missing L awkward. That kind of error feels personal because it's rooted in habit. The same fingers that type your name 1,000 times are the ones that will keep typing what's familiar, even if your intent is different. There are a few patterns to watch for. Transpositions, te for the, omissions, receive versus receive, and substitutions where a similar pattern gets used, form, from, pubic, public. Homophones and autocorrect amplify the issue. Your brain sees the right word, the keyboard substitutes the wrong one, and your eyes skip over it because they're reading the sentence as it should be, not as it actually is. Catching these requires breaking the autopilot. Slow down at least once during proofreading and read word by word. Change the visual, increase font size, switch to a different font, or invert colors. Small disruptions force your eyes to take another pass. Reading aloud, or even moving your finger under each word, makes you engage different circuits than the ones that rely on motor memory. Another trick: read the text backwards, sentence by sentence. That strips away context and expectation, so you're more likely to spot the actual letters. Finally, be gentle with yourself. Automatic errors are a sign your brain is optimizing, not failing. With a few deliberate habits, you can catch most of them before they sneak into a message or a final draft. Mental autocorrect. Have you ever skimmed a sentence where the letters are scrambled, like teiks or aoshidonig, and still read it without blinking? That's not magic. It's your brain doing a kind of instant autocorrect. I get that feeling all the time. I'll read a paragraph with typos and mentally smooth every bump as if someone's running a tiny editor in my head. Here's what's happening. When we read, we don't process every single letter in strict order. Our brains use context and patterns to predict likely words before the full input arrives. So if the first and last letters are in place and the overall word shape matches something familiar, your mind fills in the rest. Your eyes take quick jumps across the line. Those are called saccades. And in between, the brain takes a sneak peek at nearby letters, parafoveal preview, and predicts what's coming next. By the time your eyes land on the word, your brain often already has a candidate ready, and that candidate wins. This is why familiar phrases and contexts make reading easier. If I see aokedronig to a hoshiarch, my brain instantly maps that messy cluster to according to a research. It's not intelligent guessing in the dramatic sense, it's statistical prediction. Over years of reading, your neural circuits have encoded probabilities, which letters tend to follow which word combos are common, and which sentences make sense in a given situation. You've basically trained a private autocomplete. It's also why I often miss typos in my own writing. I know what I meant, so my brain corrects it before I even notice. That personal familiarity is a double-edged sword, great for reading quickly, terrible for proofreading. I can look at an email I wrote 2 minutes ago and swear there are no mistakes, until someone else points one out. There's a neat experiment you can try. Glance at T's snittens is an ex-maple. Most people decode it in a beat. Now try the same sentence backwards, or with first and last letters scrambled too. It becomes slow and clunky. The difference shows how much we rely on pattern recognition and context, not letter-by-letter decoding. Understanding mental autocorrect matters. It explains why clarity matters in writing. If you give the brain predictable cues, communication flows. It also explains why proofreading techniques like reading aloud or reading backward work. They break the brain's default prediction loop, so you actually see what's written. For everyday life, it means cut people some slack when they typo. Your mind probably fixed it anyway. For writers, it's a reminder. Structure your sentences so the reader's brain can predict easily. That's where real readability lives. Thought blocking. Which brings us to thought blocking, that moment when a sentence just vanishes. You're talking, you have the idea, and then mid-thought the words slip away like a page ripped out of a notebook. I've had it happen in quiet one-on-one conversations, in urgent work calls, and even while telling a joke to friends. 1 second I'm assembling a sentence, the next second there's a weird empty patch where meaning should be, and I'm left standing there hunting for something to finish the line. It feels small but strange. The brain literally drops the thread it was holding. There's often a physical echo to it, a tiny jolt of surprise in your chest, a blush, maybe a blink as if your eyes are trying to buy a second to reorient. It's not total amnesia. Usually I can retrieve the idea if I slow down, but sometimes the phrase is gone and won't return. Names are common victims. You introduce someone and the name evaporates like mist. Or you start a sentence, and by the time you reach the important clause, it's just empty. Thinking about it like bandwidth helps. Working memory is the short-term desktop where our brain keeps a few crucial bits of information active. When that desktop gets cluttered, stress, noise, sleep loss, multitasking, the items you were juggling can fall off the edge. Imagine trying to hold a phone number, a grocery list, and a punchline in your head while someone interrupts you and your phone buzzes. That fragile buffer is where thought blocking shows up. The brain's juggling act drops one of the balls. Triggers vary. For me, it's often tiredness and pressure, an important meeting, a tight deadline, or when I'm anxious about how I'll sound. Other times, it's simple overload. Too many tabs open in life, figuratively and literally. Caffeine, interruptions, medication side effects, or chronic conditions like ADHD can make these blanks happen more frequently. Social contexts amplify it. The fear of embarrassment makes the blank feel louder and more permanent than it usually is. The real damage isn't the empty moment itself, but what follows. A spiral of self-criticism. We freeze, worry we've exposed some defect, and sometimes try to cover it up with filler words that only make the blank more obvious. I've learned that acknowledging it, give me a second, or asking someone to repeat the last line, is less awkward than pretending everything's fine. It's a small human glitch that reveals how limited our mental workspace is. Recognizing the pattern, what precedes the blank, what makes it worse, is the first practical step. From there, tiny habits help. Slowing down, taking a breath before speaking, jotting quick notes during conversations, and giving yourself permission to pause. Thought blocking is not an indictment of intelligence. It's a sign your working memory needs a break or a little help. Sensory adaptation. That leads us straight into sensory adaptation. The reason you stop noticing that perfume in the hallway, the hum of your fridge, or the weight of your watch after a few minutes. Think about the last time you walked into a bakery. At first, the smell hits you, warm, sweet, impossible to ignore. Stand there for 10 minutes and suddenly you don't notice it anymore. Not because the smell disappeared, but because your nose and brain decided it didn't need to keep telling you about something that's constant and probably harmless. At the most basic level, sensory adaptation happens because our sensory neurons and brain reduce their response to unchanging stimulation. Neurons fire less over time when a signal stays the same, so the sensation fades from conscious awareness. Different senses adapt at different speeds. Touch is quick. slip on a ring, and after a while you forget it's there until you tug on your sleeve and feel it again. Smell can be fast too, but sometimes slow, which is why stepping outside can make that bakery scent rush back. Hearing adapts more to steady, low-level noises like a distant engine hum, an abrupt change, a new rhythm, a louder beep, immediately snaps attention back. Pain and extreme temperatures, on the other hand, often don't adapt the same way because they're signals that might require action. There's also a split between peripheral adaptation, what receptors do, and central adaptation, what your brain does. Receptors on your skin or in your nose literally reduce their firing rate when stimulated continuously. Meanwhile, your brain actively filters incoming information to avoid overload, prioritizing new, potentially important changes in the environment. Psychologists call this habituation when the mind discounts repeated, irrelevant stimuli, and it goes hand in hand with the physiological adaptation happening at the receptor level. Evolutionarily, this is brilliant design. If every constant background noise, scent, or sensation demanded your attention, your brain would be overwhelmed and slow to respond to actual threats or opportunities. Our systems conserve energy and awareness for novelty. That's why a sudden change, a different smell, a movement on the periphery, a dropped glass, immediately pulls you back in. Change equals information. You can use this to your advantage. If you're trying to notice whether a room smells musty, open a window to introduce a change and your nose will pick up the difference. If you want to clear your palate between bites, drink something neutral to reset taste receptors so the next flavor stands out. On a practical level, businesses exploit adaptation too. Ambient music at low volume fades into the background, while intermittent announcements grab attention. I remember moving into an apartment whose carpet had a noticeable odor. For the first week, it was a constant presence. After a while, I stopped noticing it. Months later, a friend visited and complained, and suddenly I smelled it again immediately. That sudden reawakening is your nervous system doing what it's supposed to do, flagging the change. Understanding sensory adaptation helps explain everyday surprises, why you can sleep through a storm after a few hours, why perfume seems to vanish, and why your clothes feel invisible until you stretch or scratch. It's the brain's way of saying, "I've got this. Unless something changes, you don't need to pay attention." With that in mind, we can start to see illusions of attention as not just quirks, but useful features. And next, we'll look at what happens when that filtering goes wrong. The "I swear I set that down right here" glitch. Which brings us to the classic, the "I swear I set that down right here" glitch. You know the one. You put your keys on the counter, walk away to do one thing, and 5 minutes later, you're convinced the keys have grown legs. This isn't magic or a mischievous house sprite. It's your brain's object permanence system misfiring under pressure. Object permanence in adults isn't the same milestone we talk about with babies learning that toys still exist when covered. For grown-ups, it's a dance between perception, attention, and memory. When you set something down, your brain should tag not just the object, but the context, the surface, the posture you were in, what you were thinking about. That tag lives in spatial and episodic memory so you can retrieve it later. But those tags are fragile. If your attention fragments, you're juggling a conversation, responding to a message, or mentally replaying your to-do list, the tagging process becomes sloppy. The memory encoding is weak or mismatched. So later your mental map shows an empty space where the keys should be. It feels like a reshuffle. Instead of a neat map where A is on the counter, B is on the table, and C is in your pocket, attention breaks that map into puzzle pieces and shuffles them. You might remember setting something down, but the where gets fuzzy. Did I put it on the couch arm or the pillow? Did I leave my sunglasses in the car or on my head? That's why so many of these disappearances are solved by the most likely place method. We run through plausible contexts rather than a precise memory. Your brain is filling in gaps using probability because the original encoding didn't stick. There's also a visual component, inattentional blindness and change blindness. If you weren't actively looking while placing the item, your visual system didn't register the scene in a way that supports later retrieval. You literally didn't form a solid visual snapshot, so when you later scan the same counter, you might not notice the object until it's pointed out. Your eyes took in the area, your brain filtered it as already seen, and the object blended into the background. Prospective memory plays a role too. Maybe you intended to pick the wallet up in 5 minutes. That intention occupies working memory, and if it competes with other mental tasks, the cue to retrieve the wallet evaporates. The end result is very human. Items vanish in plain sight because the brain didn't get a clear instruction to remember where they were placed. I've done this 100 times. My phone in the fridge, my sunglasses on my head while I frantically look for them, or my keys sitting right beside my laptop while I tear the apartment apart. It's embarrassing but also comforting. Everyone's brain shortcuts sometimes. Understanding that the glitch happens when attention fragments helps make it less infuriating and more predictable. And sometimes that's all the sanity you need when you finally find your keys in the last place you'd think to look. Emotional contagion. You've probably walked into a room and instantly picked up the mood, without anyone saying a word. That's emotional contagion. Our brains and bodies are wired to catch feelings from other people the way we catch a cold. It happens so fast and so subtly we don't always notice, but the science behind it is surprisingly concrete. At the core are mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we watch someone else do it. They were first noticed in monkeys who seemed to mirror observed movements. In humans, those same circuits respond not only to actions, but to expressions and tone. When someone smiles at you, parts of your brain light up as if you were smiling yourself. That neural echo creates a foundation for empathy, feeling what another person feels because your brain simulates it. Then there are micro-expressions, tiny, involuntary flashes of emotion across someone's face that last a fraction of a second. Think of a brief tightening at the corner of the mouth, an instant furrow of the brow, or a millisecond of widened eyes. We may miss them if we're not paying attention, but our brains don't. Even if you don't consciously register that blink of anxiety on a colleague's face, your body can pick up on it and nudge your mood toward theirs. This is why crowds seem to breathe together, why yawns spread, and why laughter in a room is contagious. It explains why you can leave a tense meeting feeling drained or step into a cafe where everyone's light and walk out feeling lighter yourself. It's not mystical. It's biology acting like a shared emotional language. Your posture, your voice pitch, the speed of your speech. These cues are all data that other brains read and respond to. Make this personal for a second. Remember a time you were exhausted but paired up with an upbeat friend and found yourself laughing more than you expected? Or the opposite, one grumpy team member turning the whole office's energy sour. Those are everyday examples of emotional contagion at work. Parents see it with toddlers. A single, calm, steady breath from a caregiver can diffuse a child's meltdown. Partners unconsciously sync heart rates and breathing when they're close. Even customer service reps learn that a small, genuine smile can shift a difficult conversation. Knowing this gives you power. If moods are contagious, then intentional moods are too. You can model calm in a stressful situation, soften your facial expression to de-escalate anger, or use enthusiastic energy to lift a group. And awareness is the first step. Once you can spot the tiny signals, you can choose which feelings to mirror and which to resist. Next, we'll look at practical techniques to use this biological language deliberately, how to catch the cues that matter and how to become the emotional signal you want others to pick up.